Hello, BookTube. It's the return just temporarily to the little book room, but you've got Needlepoint Frida right there to keep you company. I wanted to make a response video today to a video I saw on Nick Stewart's channel. He has a BookTube channel. He uploads regularly. It's interesting content, and yet he only had, when I watched his video, 40 subscribers. That's fewer subscribers than he had pieces of firewood behind him. I think we can get that number up some. He did a video about his reading pet peeves, his reading obsessions, the things that maybe annoy him about his reading. And I was fascinated by it, and I want you all to do this as well, because this is just the sort of thing I love. Your life as a reader, I love hearing about that sort of thing. He starts it off. I'll leave a link to his video down below so that you can go and watch and subscribe. It'd be nice if we had 100 subscribers by the end of the day. First, he starts off with distinguishing between book pet peeves and reading pet peeves. He's done a video on book pet peeves, and haven't we all? But these are more reading, more a reflection of his own habits, his own obsessions, his own little nervous tics. And he has 3 that he has now and 3 that he used to have and doesn't have anymore. So that's the structure that I'm going to do. For the ones that he has now, number 1 is that if he starts a series, he feels like he has to finish it, including series that are known for their longueurs, that are known for their dull patches. He mentions, for instance, Wheel of Time. I would argue that Wheel of Time has one long dull patch between book 3 and the final book written by Brandon Sanderson, that everything in between there is a dull patch. But there are lots of others. That you get any book in a series that's longer than 3 books, you're going to have a dull patch. And he feels like if he starts it, he has to finish it. He has to go through with it. Number 2 is that when he finishes a book, he then goes and reads all the reviews. He said something very interesting, that he tends to shy away from the 5-star reviews, assuming that they are shills, that they are not being critical. Instead, he goes to the middle ground, the 3 and 4-star reviews, where people might have liked the thing, but they had criticisms of it. I'm not sure that this counts as a pet peeve. Don't you all do that? Don't we all want to know what everyone else thinks of this book? Isn't that why we're on BookTube in the first place? I would argue that this would be a much worse pet peeve if you were one of those people who needs to read the reviews ahead of time in order to decide whether or not you're going to read the book at all. I would say in either case, the only review that you're perfectly clear to read are my own. Feel free to read my own. Don't bother with Open Letters Review or Open Letters Monthly, the archive of Open Letters Monthly, or even with Goodreads. Just use Google. I've written so many reviews of so many books. It's better just to type in my first and last name and then the name of the book and the name of the author. That will turn up, usually, whether or not I've written anything about the thing. It's always worthwhile judging that. And then pet peeve number 3 is he has to read the series in publication order, even if it's not in continuity order. He has to read them in the order in which they came out, even if that means he's going to be bouncing around in time in between the series. I thought that was really interesting. I don't have anything like that myself, but I bet a lot of you do. That seems to me a very bookish thing. And then he lists 3 former pet peeves of his, things that used to be tics or obsessions of his that aren't anymore. Number 1 being that he had to own a copy of every book that he reads. And he says in his video rather hilariously, I wonder how many of you can identify, that the thing that stopped that was just his budget, just money. He couldn't afford to do that. And there are a whole bunch of other things that would stop that as well, right? You have the library. You have NetGalley, services like NetGalley. You've got there are a ton of reasons not to own. You've got ebooks. You've got a ton of reasons not to own every book that you read. And then number 2 of the ones that he has given up is that he had to read only one series at a time. And he has since learned, I think he attributes a lot of this evolution to BookTube, to having a BookTube channel. He's since learned that he can bounce around from many series. I'm wondering about the rest of you. If you have a long series going, do you commit to another series? Would you ever do that in between? Like, for instance, my Deb is reading the Dresden Files. Slowly but surely she's reading her way through the Dresden Files. I don't know if she would pick up the Wheel of Time, for instance, or something like that in the middle of such a series. And number 3 of the ones that he's abandoned is they had to read only one book at a time. I've commented on this many times on this channel. You can, in fact, only read one book at a time, but because that's all that you have just one pair of eyes. But I know what it means. It doesn't really apply to me. The only reason that I get a little sarcasm out of it is because I read faster than a lot of people do. I get the impression now that he can freely bounce around from book to book and have a few on the go at the same time. And I know that's true for a lot of you. So that's fascinating. It also mentions different formats, right? You've got audio, you've got ebooks, you've got printed books. They're not always going to be in the same place. So, and those are his pet peeves, present and past, once and future pet peeves. And I want to know what yours are, and I couldn't help but make a response video with my own. I've broken mine down in the same way. I'm going to list 3 that I currently have, and then 3 that I once had and have since abandoned. So the first of mine that I currently have is that I'm so rough with books that I tend to buy multiple copies. Rather than teach myself to be gentle with books, rather than do that, I just have, for years, I have just given up on the fact. And if I get something and I really like it, I'm on the lookout automatically for another copy. In my professional life, that's not so much of a problem because I get 2 copies of a book, at least 2, sometimes 3. I get the advanced copy from the publisher, and then I get the finished copy. So if I read the book and I'm arguing with it and I'm wrestling with it and I'm hurling it down and I'm dog-earing pages. Some of you will shudder at that, but if I'm doing all of that to the advanced copy, to the ARC, then I can be fairly gentle with the finished copy. The finished copy, typically, I will be using only for review. So I will be consulting the things that weren't in the advanced copy. 90% of the review will be done before I get the finished copy. I'll be consulting the bibliography, if there is one. I'll be consulting the maps, few little details like that. Few enough details so that I can probably be gentle with the finished copy. And then sometimes down the line, the publisher will send me the finished paperback, if it has a paperback release. So my professional side, I am supplied with multiple copies, and that's great. Usually that happens, and that's great. It's the non-professional side, it's the obsessive book nerd side, where that becomes a problem. There are many, many duplicates of books in this little book room, where you would think there'd be none at all, because there really isn't that much space. What you're looking at is basically all the space there is. That's the back wall behind me, and these are the 2 walls on either side. I didn't make the bookcases at right angles. I put the bookcases at angles to fill out the room, so there's a little blank space behind each corner bookcase because they're angled to block the corner. That was after a long time of angling bookcases and just having half the bookshelf in the corner that I couldn't reach unless I moved books. But this isn't a lot of space, and yet this is where the most book duplication will happen, specifically because whenever I see a new copy of something, a double, I usually grab it. Not only because I like to have it right to hand to stick in an envelope and mail out if somebody wants it, but also because I know I'm going to ruin the copy that I have. So that's a pet peeve, a bookish pet peeve of mine that I really need to fix. I really need to just be more gentle with these things, that's all. It's just tough. It's tough for tussle-haired 20-somethings to be gentle with their possessions, because we've got like forever, man, you know? Then number 2 is not one. It's a pet peeve that I have. It's also a horror, an absolute staring horror from friends of mine in the past. It's not really active right now. Number 2 is that I let my dogs chew my books. I don't typically stop them. If they're right in front of me and it's just wanton and they have plenty of other things to chew and I'm right there, I'll probably suggest that maybe they chew something else, but I don't care and they know it, and they always have. It's not a problem right now because my little Frida, there's the needlepoint Frida, the real one's not in this room right now, but it's not a problem right now because Frida doesn't care to do stuff like, she's not a destructive dog at all. She never has been, even as a puppy. She just doesn't have that urge at all. She is perfectly domesticated. She came that way out of the box. So she doesn't do any of the destructive stuff at all. But I know that the pet peeve is still there. I know that if I had a crowd of dogs, or if I had a big, goofy, unruly dog, or more than one, I know that I would just let them do it. It's perfectly natural. Not only are books wonderfully semi-organic, which is trust me, it trips every trigger in a dog's mind. It's not a living thing, and they know that, but it's not a completely dead thing either, and they know that. It's in between, and they love that. They absolutely love that. Dogs have 17,000 years of evolution with humans, but they have 170,000 years of evolution as carrion feeders. And that's exactly what books are to them. That's exactly the trigger in their mind. This is not quite alive, but it's not dead. I should eat this. This is vaguely organic. Not only that, but it also smells of you. And if it's a used book, lots of other people too. So it is just heaven. It's heaven for a dog to chew on. So I've never had the heart to stop my dogs doing it. And then the third pet peeve that is current is that I get overly impatient with authors for padding their books. I'm glancing at the iPad mini here. I get overly impatient with authors for doing that. And you might think, well, if you're a critic, surely it's right for you to get impatient with authors for padding books. And by padding books, I mean, I'm sure you know exactly what I mean. You're reading a book and you get to the top of a page, and let's say it's a fiction book, and the two main characters are going to a restaurant. And you get at the top of a page and you just sense that the author is checked out. This is going to be autopilot until you get to the big revelation in the conversation, in the meal, 3 pages later. But the rest of it is just going to be autopilot. And even more so with nonfiction. Oh my God, with nonfiction, where there'll be a book about, I don't even know, the evolution of the elephant. And the author will reach the cliff point where they now have to give you a potted history of the mechanics of evolution by means of natural selection, not dealing with elephants, but just the process in general. And you could do that with a great deal of energy. You could make that wonderful. But instead, you'll get to a passage like that in a book, and you will feel the author check out. You'll just feel it happen. And you will know that they are on autopilot for the next however many pages. That happens all the time. I'm sorry to say it happens far more often in works of nonfiction than it does in fiction, where authors, when they get to what one of them disdainfully refers to as a Wikipedia section, they just go on autopilot. A total abrogation of their obligation to the reader, but they do it anyway. And the reason that it's a pet peeve to get overly irritated with that is because part of it comes with the territory. Now, there's never any excuse for writing checked out, boring prose, but many authors, including especially many nonfiction authors, do have a word count, a page target that they're going for. I know it sounds like I'm saying some padding is inevitable. It isn't, but it's not inevitable in the writer's task of generating the book. The writer could be more conscientious than that and not pad anything. But it is, in a way, inevitable in the writing process if you're not going to do that. Because if you don't do that, if you just want to write the stuff where your heart is in it and not any of the rest of it about the evolution of the elephant, for instance, your book is going to be 100 pages long. And that's not commercially viable. Your publisher, even if you handed in such a thing, would say, this has to be 2.5 times longer than this. I don't like it. I very much prefer for instance, if we're talking about nonfiction, I very much prefer the nonfiction works that don't do that. They fill this room. But quite a few of them do, and I should just take it as the price of admission. As a critic and as a reader, I should take it as the price of admission a little bit more than I do. It irritates me more than it should. So that's my third current pet peeve with reading. But I want to give you 3 that I don't have anymore, just like Nick Stewart did. Number 1 is that I had to have a print and paper version of whatever I was reading. So even long after I fell in love with e-reading and knew that it was comfortable for me, knew that it was viable, that it was every bit as much reading for getting lost in a book, for annotating a book, all that sort of stuff, that it was every bit as much a thing I loved as print and paper books. There was a long time where I still had to have a print and paper version. I didn't consider the ebook to be real. When it is, it might be a little more fragile in some ways than a paper and ink book. I had a horrifying experience with that just the other day, where on one of my iPads, my Nook app refused to open. Suddenly refused to open. I'd been reading on it the day before. It suddenly refused to open at all. And it wouldn't update. And I turned the machine all the way off and then turned it all the way back on. And I checked all sorts of other things. Simply wouldn't do it. It wouldn't open. And I realized after a very frustrated hour of all kinds of alternatives that the only way I would be able to use that app would be to delete it and re-download it, which means that the 2,500 books I'd sideloaded onto it would all be gone. And sure enough, I did that. Eventually, I had to. I couldn't open it, so I couldn't use it. It wasn't like, if I'd been able to open it but not add to it, I might have kept it. But I wasn't able to open it. I don't like wasted real estate on my screen, so I deleted it and downloaded it again. Sure enough, all of those books were gone, just wiped clean. That, needless to say, doesn't happen with print books. I'm not going to walk into the guest room here or whatever, and suddenly there'll be no bookshelves on the walls. That's not going to happen. They might be annoying. They might need dusting, but they're still going to be there. So even though I know that ebooks can be a little trickier than that, and it's not the end of the world. Even that horrifying thing is not the end of the world, because probably 1,000 of those ebooks that were wiped out when I re-downloaded the Nook app, I have as files, so I can send them again to myself. I can re-download them on that device. I'm not 100% sure how sane that is to refill that Nook app when it vanished on me. Maybe it's not reliable, but the thing that was bothering me the most was the 1,500 books that I don't have on file and that I don't remember. So I don't know what was on that, what those were and what they weren't. But even so, even given little nightmare blips like that, I no longer need a print and paper copy of every book that I read. Good Lord. I read a ton of e-copies sent straight from publishers that I never get a print copy of. Never. I'd be up to my ham hocks in them. And, if you take enough precautions, even those technical blips are not the end of the world. If I had been saving to a computer screen, to a computer memory, a laptop's memory, if I'd been saving every one of those book files, then I wouldn't be out anything except the tedium of re-sideloading them. And those ebooks are on multiple other devices, multiple other Nook apps on other devices. So it's not the end of the world. It was just annoying. And the minute it happened, I realized this doesn't happen with print and paper books. Say what you want about them, but they don't just disappear. But anyway, that's number one. And then number two is that once upon a time, I had to personalize all of my books. And I don't just mean mark them. I very lightly, in pencil, I mark every book that passes through my hands. It's not something that you would notice. It's not obtrusive at all, but it's something that I know how to find, so that if I find a book and it's ringing a bell, I can automatically check to see if I've ever had it, if it's in fact my old copy. It's not intrusive. You would never notice it, but once upon a time, I liked the intrusive. Once upon a time, I wrote my name in pen on the flyleaf. Once upon a time, I used book plates, those vanities, those just monuments to human vanity, to put a book plate in a book. Well, especially when you go through them as much as I do. And I knew that. I knew what my turnover was, and I still did it. I don't do that anymore, but once upon a time I did. Now I consider that even the keepers in this room are just going through my hands. I am temporarily using them. Almost every book in this room has had owners before I came along. And I have to assume that most of them will have owners after I'm gone. So my presence, sure, in marginalia, if I get really involved with the book, no apologies there. And a little mark even if I don't, but not the rest of it. I'm not building the Steve Donoghue Memorial Library. And then number three of the ones that I had but don't have anymore is a little bit of an oddity. When I read books in the past for decades, I felt that I had to write to the publisher about the book when I was done. They used to have, a snail mail address for general inquiries. Now they have an email address for general inquiries. I don't know who looks at that, either one of them. But for decades, I would do that. I would read a W.W. Norton book, and when I finished with it, I would write a response to the book and send it off to the publisher. It just felt natural. It felt like a natural circle that I had to close. And I don't do that anymore, thank God. I got rid of that pet peeve and replaced it with the one that matters, the version of it that should be there and that everybody should have, and that thankfully everybody does have, which is definitely write a response to the books that you read. Definitely respond to them, but do it in public for other readers. Don't send it privately to the publisher where they're going to ignore it, throw it in a trash can. Instead, that's what Goodreads is for. Let other people know what you think about the book. I do that. I don't use Goodreads as much as I should. But I am a reviewer, so I have an excuse, which is that plenty of people are reading what I think about plenty of books without me using Goodreads. But I should use it more than I do. I will. I always try to make amends. I started that a few months ago. I started to do a little better at that. Now that I'm kicking myself that I should do more of that. But that's a pet peeve that I had. It was very old fashioned for just the longest time. I thought I should tell the publisher what I thought of this book of theirs that I just bought. Largely as a holdover, I think, from the old days when the publisher of the book meant a lot more than it now does. Once upon a time, readers developed a very personal relationship with book publishers. Oh, it's a W. W. Norton book. Oh, I see. Oh, it's an Oxford book. Okay. Well, that's different. There was a time, there were many times for many decades where you could look at a forthcoming book catalog, and just by reading the book's description, you would know who the likely publisher was before you got to the little information in parentheses at the bottom. That's how distinctive the lists were. They aren't anymore. And maybe when they were that distinctive, maybe that's what made me think, well, I'm reading one of your books, so I should let you know what I think of it. And I did get a lot of responses from people working at publishers. A lot of people would dash off a quick letter in response, or a quick email in response. Plenty of times those words got to publishers, who would then respond to or authors who would then respond back to the publisher, and they would send it to me. But better by far to leave them out of it and just deal with you, just deal with other readers. That's all. That's by far the most important. So that pet peeve isn't entirely gone. It's just transformed into something that makes more sense. So there you go. That are reading pet peeves, a la Nick Stewart. I'll leave a link to his channel down below, and I would love to hear your own. But if you feel like doing this, feel free to do it in the format that he sets out. 3 that you currently have, and 3 that you don't have anymore. That would be wonderful. That would be very satisfying for a nosy Parker like myself. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up and get back to the bean. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.